1969 was the year that Neil Armstrong first stepped on the moon, the year that the Beatles performed their last concert, and the year that the Supreme Court finalized its landmark ruling, Tinker v. Des Moines Independent Community School District. This court case is a landmark ruling that extended the rights of expression to public school students. Because this case is a precedent, continues to impact the American people, and shows the limit on free speech, Tinker v. Des Moines is not likely to be overturned anytime soon.
In December 1965, 3 students of the Des Moines Independent Community School District, including 16-year-old Chris Eckert, 15-year-old John Tinker, and his 13-year-old sister, Mary Beth Tinker, decided to wear black armbands in protest of the Vietnam War and in favor of the Christmas truce called for by Senator Robert Kennedy. They were well aware that the school district principals had instituted a policy which specifically banned students from wearing armbands in protest of the war in order to retain order in the classroom from the growing anti-war sentiment. The students were suspended until they decided to remove their armbands, which was January 1st.
On March 14, 1966, the students' parents, along with the Iowa Civil Liberties Union and the American Civil Liberties Union, filed a civil rights lawsuit on the students' behalf in the U.S. District Court, asking for an injunction to restrain the enforcement of the school's armband policy due to the violation of their First and 14th Amendment rights. The district court, however, upheld the decision of the Des Moines School Board on the grounds that the protest could have been a potential disruption in the classroom.
In September 1966, the Tinkers then appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit, which ended in a tie vote, thus allowing the district court's decision to stand. On January 17, 1968, the Tinkers decided to appeal directly to the Supreme Court through the use of a cert petition, which is essentially a petition the losing party files asking the Supreme Court to review a lower court decision, which, in the Tinkers' case, the court granted.
On November 12, 1968, Dan L. Johnston, the civil rights lawyer who represented the Tinkers, argued his case before the Supreme Court against Alan A. Herrick, who represented the Des Moines School District.
On February 24, 1969, the Supreme Court issued its 7-2 ruling in favor of the petitioners and against the school district, overturning the decision of the lower court. It did so on the basis that 1. The petitioners' peaceful conduct was protected by the Free Speech Clause in the First Amendment and the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment. 2. The First Amendment applies to students and teachers everywhere. And 3. Prohibiting someone's expression of opinion without any necessary evidence is not permissible under the First and 14th Amendments.
The Vietnam War, lasting from 1955 to 1975, was a conflict between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Communist North Vietnam was supported by China, the Soviet Union, and North Korea, whereas the anti-communist government of South Vietnam was supported by the United States and its allies. Lyndon B. Johnson, elected president in 1964, significantly expanded America's role in Vietnam, promising to defend freedom and democracy.
I have asked the commanding general, General Westmoreland, what more he needs to meet this mounting aggression. He has told me, and we will meet his needs.
By the end of 1965, about 200,000 American troops were stationed in Vietnam, and more were on their way. At first, there was little protesting against the war. U.S. involvement in Vietnam in order to spread democracy was viewed by many as patriotic. However, as the draft increased in October of 1965 and the war kept dragging on, opposition to the president's war policies increased dramatically, particularly in college campuses. At the same time, the civil rights movement was in full swing, peaking in 1963 with the Selma to Montgomery marches.
Tinker v. Des Moines helped establish the limits on free speech in public schools in the United States. Symbolic speech, either verbal or nonverbal, is a behavior that expresses an idea. It can range from wearing a political pin to flag burning. This type of speech is protected by the First Amendment, but this depends on whether the message conveyed was intentional and the likelihood of the message being comprehended. Tinker v. Des Moines brought into question symbolic speech rights in public schools. According to Justice Abe Fortas, symbolic speech rights cease if they materially disrupt classwork or involve substantial disorder or invasion of the rights of others. As well as establishing the limit on free speech, Tinker v. Des Moines is a precedent as it is a frequently cited case when it comes to determining the extent of free speech in American public schools. It is now used as a standard in school law, and it has been cited in numerous court cases, including Hazelwood School District v. Kohlenmeyer and Morse v. Frederick. The case also continues to be cited to explain the legality of certain protests, such as the Occupy Wall Street. On top of that, it could be argued that it is also a precedent for civil disobedience in the public school environment.
Tinker v. Des Moines, on top of being a precedent and establishing the limit of free speech in the classroom, continues to impact America today. It essentially made American public schools more democratic and encouraged students to speak out. Students often take up this case's framework when it comes to school attire, political activity, and the internet.
Personally, we agree with the final ruling. While some argue that students do not have the same rights as adults and that this ruling has given students too much power, as stated in the dissent, students cannot be expected to shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. The 3 students were silent and passive with their protests, and wearing their armbands was a purely symbolic act. We understand that it was a very controversial protest at the time and that the school wanted to avoid a learning disturbance. Yet schools are supposed to train students to be articulate and active individuals in society. By ruling with the petitioners, the Supreme Court removed the concept that children should be seen and not heard. Tinker v. Des Moines was a Supreme Court landmark case that extended the rights of expression to public school students. It is a legal precedent, established the limit of free speech in the classroom, and continues to impact America, removing the possibility that it will be overturned anytime soon.